Could a single, furious argument between two men have derailed the D-Day landings? In the tense, final weeks before the largest amphibious invasion in human history, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, haunted by the ghosts of past military disasters, was pushed to the breaking point by a single detail in the master plan. He decided to confront his top general, the brilliant but notoriously difficult Bernard Law Montgomery, over a decision he believed could sabotage the entire operation. The showdown that followed was a battle of wills so intense and so private that it was scrubbed from official histories for decades, a clash of titans that threatened to shatter a general's career and, with it, the hope for liberating a continent. What followed wasn't a court-martial, but a moment of human frailty and defiance that reveals the hidden pressures of command. This is a story of immense ego and unimaginable stress, a glimpse into the human drama behind the strategic maps of the Second World War. If you believe history is shaped by the complex and often conflicting personalities of its leaders, then subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear the stories that are often left in the margins. Let us know in the comments what you know about the complex relationship between these two monumental figures. In the late spring of 1944, the fate of the free world hung precariously over a narrow sliver of the English Channel. Operation Overlord, the long-awaited, desperately needed invasion of Nazi-occupied France, was coiled and ready to strike. It was an undertaking of almost unimaginable scale. Millions of men, thousands of ships, and a sky filled with aircraft were poised to finally breach Hitler's formidable fortress Europe. The political will driving this immense effort was embodied by one man, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a leader whose spirit had become the very definition of British defiance. His voice had rallied a nation when it stood alone, his presence a bulldog-like symbol of unbreakable resolve. The military instrument for this colossal task, the man tasked with leading the Allied armies across the treacherous beaches of Normandy, was General Bernard Law Montgomery, a commander as tactically brilliant as he was personally prickly, precise, and utterly self-assured. These two titans of the war were inextricably linked by a common cause, yet they could not have been more different in temperament, habit, and philosophy. One was a creature of intuition, powered by brandy, cigars, and soaring, romantic oratory. The other was a monument to militant self-discipline, fueled by water, rigid routine, and an unshakable, almost infuriating self-confidence. Theirs was a relationship born of necessity, a complex mixture of mutual respect, professional dependence, and constant, simmering private frustration. Churchill, the grand strategist, knew he needed Montgomery's cold, methodical military genius to deliver the victory the world was waiting for. Montgomery, the field commander, knew he needed Churchill's unbending political will to even have a war to fight. To truly understand the explosion that was about to happen in the final, agonizing weeks before D-Day, you must first understand the two men at its epicenter and the history that bound and divided them. In so many ways, they were perfect opposites, two poles of the British character. Winston Churchill was a force of nature, an aristocrat with a romantic, almost swashbuckling conception of warfare. He thought in grand, sweeping strokes of history, often seeing himself as a figure walking with destiny. But he was also a man haunted by failure. He personally carried the deep, searing scars of the 1915 Gallipoli campaign, a bloody and catastrophic amphibious assault in the Dardanelles, which he had championed as First Lord of the Admiralty. The memory of that disaster, of a generation of young men from Britain, Australia, and New Zealand slaughtered on the beaches of a Turkish peninsula, was a ghost that never left his side. As the planning for Operation Overlord intensified, Churchill was tormented by the fear of another Gallipoli. The thought of a new generation being cut down on the sands of Normandy preyed on him relentlessly. This profound fear made him restless, interventionist, and often desperate to control every minute detail, to probe for any weakness, and to second-guess his commanders in a way that often drove them to distraction. Then there was Bernard Montgomery. If Churchill was a roaring lion, a creature of passion and impulse, then Monty was a wary, calculating fox, cautious, precise, and totally single-minded. He was the son of a bishop, a man of famously Spartan habits who abhorred the tobacco and alcohol that were so central to the Prime Minister's daily life. A popular story, though likely apocryphal, perfectly captures their dynamic. Montgomery is said to have told Churchill, "I do not drink, I do not smoke, I sleep a great deal, and that is why I am 100% fit." Churchill, cigar in hand, supposedly shot back, "I do drink, I do smoke, I sleep very little, and that is why I am 200% fit." The tale is almost certainly a fabrication, but its endurance speaks to the fundamental chasm between their very beings. Their cautious respect was forged in the desperate days of 1940, after the fall of France. Montgomery had admired Churchill's lonely, prophetic warnings about Hitler throughout the 1930s, and Churchill had been impressed by the general's innovative and demanding training exercises. But their bond was truly hammered into a weapon in the scorched deserts of North Africa. In August of 1942, with the British Eighth Army demoralized and on the verge of collapse against the legendary Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Churchill flew to Cairo in a fury to shake up the command. After his first choice for commander was tragically killed in a plane crash, Churchill, on the advice of his top military advisor, General Sir Alan Brooke, reluctantly appointed the austere and little-known Montgomery. Monty's effect on the Eighth Army was nothing short of electric. He arrived radiating an almost messianic confidence, immediately halting any talk of retreat. Yet, he was also maddeningly cautious. He flatly refused to be rushed into a premature battle, insisting on meticulously building up an overwhelming advantage in men, tanks, and artillery. This methodical approach drove the impatient Churchill, who was under immense political pressure and desperate for a victory, to distraction. The Prime Minister fired off a volley of increasingly agitated telegrams, demanding to know when, if ever, Montgomery intended to attack. But Montgomery would not budge. He was patiently assembling his master plan, a detailed, step-by-step operational sequence designed to grind Rommel's Panzer Army Africa into dust with minimal risk to his own men. He was famously, almost obsessively, careful with the lives of his soldiers, a trait that would define his entire career and earn him their undying loyalty. Finally, in late October 1942, on his own schedule, he unleashed the Battle of El Alamein. It was the decisive turning point of the war that Churchill had prayed for, a stunning victory that made Monty a national hero overnight. Churchill now had his victorious general, but in the process, he had also discovered he had a general who had proven he would defy even the Prime Minister to do things his own way. This was the volatile dynamic they carried with them to the shores of Normandy. By the spring of 1944, the pressure on every person involved in Operation Overlord was almost unbearable. The success of D-Day depended on a million moving parts functioning in perfect, intricate harmony. For Churchill, the stakes were intensely personal. He saw Overlord as the culmination of the entire war, the fulfillment of his promise to fight on the beaches, on the landing grounds, in the fields, and in the streets. Yet his confidence was constantly eroded by his memories of Gallipoli. He questioned everything, probed for any weakness, and terrified his commanders with his relentless, detailed interrogations. His interventions became so frequent that his chief of the Imperial General Staff, Alan Brooke, often had to act as a buffer, shielding the military planners from the Prime Minister's anxieties. At a final momentous D-Day briefing on May 15, 1944, held at St. Paul's School in London, with King George VI himself in attendance, Churchill delivered a statement that has often been misunderstood. After the commanders, including Eisenhower and Montgomery, had laid out their final plans, the Prime Minister stood and declared, "Gentlemen, I am hardening in favor of this enterprise." This was not a sign of opposition. It was Churchill's high theatrical way of showing that he was now fully, emotionally committed, his deep-seated fears finally conquered by the sheer professionalism and determination of the men before him. Montgomery, as the commander of all Allied ground forces for the initial invasion, carried a different but no less immense burden. His job was to get the armies ashore, weather the inevitable storm of German counterattacks, and carve out a secure foothold in Normandy. True to form, his plan was incredibly detailed, a masterpiece of logistical foresight. He wasn't just planning a battle. He was orchestrating a complex logistical monster, ensuring that every soldier, every bullet, and every tin of food arrived in the right place at the right time. And that is precisely where the trouble began. As the final plans were being locked into place, a single number, buried deep within the operational orders, caught Churchill's eye. Montgomery's plan called for over 2,000 officers and clerks from his 21st Army Group headquarters to land in Normandy shortly after the initial assault waves. To Churchill, this was pure, unadulterated madness. In a desperate battle where every single rifleman and every single tank crew would be desperately needed to hold the fragile beachheads against furious German panzer divisions, Monty wanted to land a legion of administrators. To the Prime Minister, it smacked of bureaucracy run wild, a general more concerned with his own administrative comfort than with the bloody reality of the fight. These were, in his mind, 2,000 men who should be carrying guns, not clipboards and rubber stamps. They would take up precious, life-saving space on landing craft, clog up the already chaotic beaches, and contribute nothing to the immediate, brutal fight for survival. It seemed to confirm his deepest fears about a command culture that prioritized procedure over fighting spirit. The number festered in his mind. His anxiety, fueled by the ghosts of Gallipoli and the immense strain of his office, boiled over into pure, unadulterated rage. He felt he had no choice. He had to step in, personally and immediately. This story of human drama and high-stakes leadership is a testament to the pressures faced by those at the very top. If you find these untold stories of history as fascinating as we do, we invite you to become part of our community. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone you think would appreciate this deeper look into the past. And let us know in the comments below what part of this story you found most surprising or didn't know before. What Happened Next is an incredible episode in the history of the Second World War, primarily because it remained a complete secret for decades. It was left out of Churchill's own exhaustive memoirs and is absent from all the official histories of the campaign. The story comes to us from a single, uncorroborated source, Montgomery himself, who recounted the event years after the war to his authorized biographer, Nigel Hamilton. What we have, therefore, is the confrontation scene entirely through Monty's eyes. Whether it is the absolute, unvarnished truth or a dramatic narrative polished by a man with a legendary and well-documented ego, it provides a stunning, intimate picture of these two powerful men colliding at a moment of supreme historical importance. According to Montgomery's account, sometime in late May 1944, with D-Day just a few weeks away, Churchill made an unannounced visit. He did not come to the official 21st Army Group headquarters at St. Paul's School, but to some other, unspecified location for a private meeting, away from the prying eyes of their respective staffs. He arrived, in Montgomery's telling, like a thundercloud of righteous anger and asked to see the commander entirely alone. Montgomery received him in his office. The Prime Minister, his voice heavy with fury and exhaustion, got straight to the point. He confronted Montgomery about the 2,000 administrative staff scheduled for an early crossing to France. He argued passionately that these men were not fighters, that bringing them over in the initial stages was a reckless luxury the invasion could not afford. It undermined the entire spirit of the enterprise, he declared, which should be about teeth, not tail, about bayonets, not bureaucrats. He demanded that Montgomery change the plan at once. In his own retelling of the event, Montgomery listened patiently, without interruption, as the Prime Minister vented his frustration. When Churchill had finished, Montgomery calmly began to explain his reasoning. These were not, he insisted, just clerks shuffling paper. They were the central nervous system of his entire army group. They were the highly trained personnel who would handle the flow of battlefield intelligence, manage the critical resupply of ammunition and fuel, coordinate air support, and track the grim calculus of casualties. Without this command and control element fully operational from the very first day, the Army would be fighting blind and deaf, stumbling into chaos. He explained that his entire philosophy of command was built on meticulous control and situational awareness, and that required a fully functioning headquarters from the moment he stepped ashore. But it was his next argument that transformed this from a technical disagreement over logistics into a profound battle of wills. Montgomery looked at the Prime Minister and stated that he had personally reviewed and approved these plans. His entire staff, from his Chief of Staff Francis de Guingamp downwards, knew it. To arbitrarily change the plan now, at the 11th hour, would send a catastrophic signal to the entire command structure, that their commander's decisions were not final, that they could be casually overruled from London. It would, he insisted, shatter the confidence of his staff and, by extension, the confidence of the entire army in his leadership at the most critical moment imaginable. Churchill, however, was unmoved. For him, this was a matter of principle. It was about fighting men, not morale built on administrative process. He pressed his demand again, his authority as Prime Minister hanging in the air. It was then, according to his own story, that Montgomery, the famously cautious and methodical general, made the single biggest gamble of his entire career. He looked his Prime Minister directly in the eye and delivered an ultimatum. The words he claimed to have used were simple, direct, and utterly defiant. I could never allow it, never. He let the word hang in the tense silence of the room. This was not a negotiation. It was a line drawn in the sand. Then he delivered the follow-up, a move that put the burden of the decision and the fate of the invasion squarely back onto Churchill's shoulders. If you think that is wrong, Montgomery stated coolly, that can only mean that you have lost confidence in me. It was an astonishing moment. A general was telling his Prime Minister, the man who had appointed him the iconic leader of the nation, to either back him completely or fire him on the spot. He was daring Winston Churchill to sack his top ground commander just weeks before the most important and perilous military operation of the entire war. Montgomery had called his bluff. In that tense, silent office, the future of Operation Overlord hung in the balance. Churchill had been directly, unequivocally defied by his subordinate. He had every right and every reason to dismiss Montgomery on the spot for insubordination, an act that would have thrown the D-Day plans into utter chaos. But he didn't. Instead, in Montgomery's telling of the story, something completely unexpected happened. Faced with the general's unbreakable will, Winston Churchill, the great wartime leader, the global icon of British defiance, the man who had promised his people nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat, broke down. According to Montgomery, he was moved to tears. For Montgomery, this was not a sign of weakness in his leader. He did not see it as a personal victory over his boss, but as a moment of profound, almost spiritual connection. In his interpretation, Churchill's tears were not from anger or humiliation. They were tears born of the immense, crushing strain of his office, of the unbearable weight of responsibility for the lives of so many, and, finally, of understanding. He believed that in that moment of raw emotion, their fragile and often fractious relationship had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger. Those tears, Montgomery felt, sealed a bond of mutual trust and esteem between us. Churchill, the man who had seemed a pillar of strength to the world, had supposedly shed his own in the office of his most difficult general. He said nothing more about the 2,000 clerks. The matter was dropped. Montgomery had won. His headquarters staff would go to Normandy as planned. The two men went back to their monumental tasks. A few weeks later, on June 6, 1944, Montgomery's armies stormed the beaches of Normandy. The invasion was a success. The showdown, and its strange, emotional conclusion, remained their secret, a pivotal moment of human conflict hidden within the grand, sweeping drama of D-Day. But if Montgomery thought that this dramatic confrontation had permanently settled the dynamic between them, he was profoundly mistaken. In the grueling months that followed the successful landings, Montgomery's leadership once again came under fire. His slow, grinding and methodical advance inland, particularly the long and costly delay in capturing the key city of Cannes, frustrated Churchill and the American High Command, including the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Montgomery argued forcefully that he was fighting the battle exactly as he had planned, drawing the bulk of the German elite panzer divisions onto his British and Canadian forces, thereby allowing the American forces to break out on the western flank. But to an impatient Churchill in London, it looked like dangerous stagnation. The friction did not stop there. During the crisis of the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944-45, Montgomery was given command over the Northern American armies and performed with undeniable skill, calmly stabilizing the collapsing front. His triumph, however, was completely overshadowed by a disastrous press conference he gave on January 7, 1945. In it, he presented himself as the master strategist who had coolly arrived on the scene to clean up the American mess, barely crediting the American soldiers who were doing the bulk of the fighting and dying. The speech infuriated his American allies, nearly causing a major diplomatic incident. A furious Churchill had to give an emergency speech in the House of Commons to smooth things over, very pointedly calling the battle undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war and a major victory. This incident, and others like it, likely gave rise to the most famous quote ever associated with Montgomery, often attributed to Churchill: "In defeat, indomitable; in advance, invincible; in victory, insufferable." It perfectly captures the paradox of the man, a brilliant general who could be impossibly, maddeningly arrogant. The only problem with the quote? There is no concrete evidence Churchill ever actually said or wrote it. It is almost certainly a myth, a line that was simply too good and too true not to be pinned on the two men. Despite these constant clashes, a deep and complex bond did endure. Churchill knew that for all his infuriating prickliness, Monty was a winner who was, above all, careful with his soldiers' lives, a quality the Prime Minister, forever haunted by the losses of the First World War, valued deeply. And Monty knew that Churchill was the one leader with the unbreakable political will to see the war through to its absolute conclusion. After the war, their friendship apparently deepened. Montgomery, in his typically precise and self-aggrandizing fashion, claimed that he visited Churchill at his beloved country home, Chartwell, a total of 48 times. Whether the number is exact or not, it's clear they remained in each other's orbits, two old warriors bound by a shared, titanic history. There is one final, poignant story that brings their complicated relationship full circle, also brought to us by Montgomery's biographer, Nigel Hamilton. As a young man, Hamilton was asked by the aging field marshal to join him on a visit to see Churchill, who was then in his final, frail years, a shadow of his former self. "The old boy needs me," Monty explained simply. Hamilton watched as the two old men sat together in silence, their great conflicts and world-shaking arguments now ancient history. The man who claimed to have stood defiantly before his prime minister now looked at his old boss with deep, undisguised emotion. As they left, Hamilton noticed that it was Montgomery's eyes that were now moist. The general who said he saw his prime minister weep in a moment of supreme crisis now shed his own tears for the Lion in Winter. The story of Churchill and Montgomery's secret showdown is far more than just a dramatic historical anecdote. It pulls back the curtain on the incredible human pressure behind the monumental strategic decisions of the war. It serves as a powerful reminder that history is not just made by the clash of armies, but by the clash of wills between powerful, brilliant, and deeply flawed individuals. The defiant words Montgomery claimed he spoke represented an enormous gamble, one rooted in his absolute, unshakable belief in his own plan and his own abilities. The Prime Minister's alleged tears, in turn, offer a rare and humanizing glimpse of the vulnerability hidden beneath that famous bulldog exterior. Their confrontation, whether entirely true or subtly embellished by an old soldier's memory, shows us that victory in the Second World War was never a sure thing. It was a path filled with doubt, fear, and profound personal conflict, navigated one difficult human decision at a time. The stories of these decisions are the very fabric of our history, and by understanding them, we understand ourselves. If you agree and want to continue exploring the human side of history's greatest conflicts, we ask you to subscribe, like this video, share it with someone who needs this perspective, and tell us in the comments what other hidden stories you think deserve to be told.